is Big Man Tyrone, and you're about to watch the MtG Cabal cast with your hosts, Woad, Thirsty, and Reptile. Sub to us on all your podcast networks at MtG Cabal Cast and YouTube.
Alrighty, guys, welcome to the newest episode of the Cabal cast, and this is part 2 of our foil boogaloo. So today, now that, episode 1 was basically the history of foils, how they evolved, everything else, we're just going to dig into our spec strategies, when we spec, and what do we look for in a foil spec. Pretty basic, and we each have pretty different approaches to it as well.
Yep.
So let's get started.
All right. So as you mentioned, we have different approaches, and a lot of times it comes down to, between the two of us, when we seem to spec. For me, not in general, just in foils. For me, I like to wait until a card kind of proves itself before I move in on foils. So a good example of this is Wild Defiance from Avacyn Restored years ago at a Modern PT on day 1 when I watched it do well on camera and that card ran roughshod over a format that was full of burn. I immediately moved in on foil Wild Defiance and, crushed it there. Similarly, when I mentioned I can't think of it now, from New Phyrexia, the exile creature that adds a green mana, the Elvish Spirit Guide from that set, Chancellor of the Tangle.
Yeah, Chancellor, that one.
Yeah, the Chancellor of the Tangle. I went in on foils because I expected the Neo brand deck to pop off based on what was happening on Moto. So I kind of look for a little bit of a proving ground when it comes to a card pedigree. One more recently that I just picked up on is Helix Pinnacle from Mystery Boosters, because it only comes in foil, and people were charging set non-foil prices for the foil version. That card has a pedigree in EDH, so I just moved in on that. So that's kind of my timing overall. I think when we discussed Simic Ascendancy as a card to spec on, I moved in on foils there, and I think I mentioned that as well. And that kind of plays into it as well. I waited a while on Simic Ascendancy. I watched the playability increase on EDH. It just kind of moved into the format a little bit, and prices had remained fairly stable for a while, so I waited for that. I don't just kind of like shoot at the hip, because I've been burned before. And where I got burned, and the lesson I learned, was actually around the Khans of Tarkir pre-release. Because at that point, they were doing any card as a pre-release promo. That's where it started. And my thought was, okay, if you're going to foil a card, then the pimp version of a foil card from a set is going to be the pre-release version with the date stamp. And I didn't seek out dig through times like that, but I picked them up through trade naturally. So I didn't get burned from cash, I just got burned from stock. And that never kind of picked up. And that very much soured me on the idea overall of pre-release promos as a way to kind of spec over time. Just because of what, they represent. And if for some reason it seems like people feel like there's just a glut of pre-release promos, or they just dislike the date stamp on them when they can get the set foil without. And I misinterpreted that logic early on, and had I waited, I would have seen that happen. So I've kind of learned over time from my own mistakes that I want to wait for something to be proven a little bit so I have more data in front of me, and then I can make an educated decision based on that.
So as an aside to that, and proving my point of when I believe in specking on foils, that logic is wrong. There's fewer date-stamped ones, so it is objectively better. Finance doesn't bear that out, unfortunately. When it comes to specking on foils, I just like shiny things. So here's some June 2 Stakes, Brink of Madness, and Planar Collapses.
Yep. One of us is a magpie.
Yes. Clearly, and I even said that. What you don't see is a stack of over 150 foil Sarkhan's Unsealings, because I'm getting burned on those as we speak.
Yeah.
I generally, when it comes to foils, look for less of a proving ground in terms of play. I look more for market trends. And one of the things that's, my big burning on that has been standard foils. When Chandra TOD first dropped, I was like, this is great. Card's worth $1 million. Let's get it. Nobody wanted it. So I would sit there with like 6 of these in a case and maybe sell one a whole weekend. And I'd be like, all right, well, I paid all this money for those. Like, I have to put them on TCG at this point because I can't move them. Mm-hmm. And then looking at market trends and stuff with like the old school bubble and seeing some of those mirrored in foil cards, that's where I go. I tend to be more on the investor side of it and less on the playability side of foils. Similar to masterpieces, obviously, like the Invention series is like kerosene soaked in gasoline.
Yep.
Those cards are insane because it's a type of thing that they're not going to do again until they do them again. So for now, they're definitely a good spot to park your money. And I like going more for the unique or something that's less likely to see print again, such as Shibari Bondage Tangle Wire as a prime example, because From the Vaults are dead. They're not doing those anymore. So I think literally all of the From the Vaults would be something that I'd be like, all right, I can park $20 in this whatever crappy FTV Angel or Dragons. Look, here's a Kilnmouth Dragon or whatever's in that thing.
Yep.
And I try to look for those. And I try to be, all right, this is something I could see reasonably happening, such as with June 2 stakes. Or Brink of Madness or Planar Collapse when I called that one out. I said, this is something I could see happening reasonably. I think odds are pretty good, and I'll put some money where my mouth is on that and try to invest in that. And it's a lot more art than science.
Yes.
For me. And incidentally, that leads to me getting burned a little bit more on some of my foils, but I do have binders of pretty things that are never going to be worth any money. Yep. So I've got that going for me.
Right now, I'm looking for another interesting point. So something else that I was doing for a while, there was some argument in like, I don't know, 6 or so years ago that arbitrage from MKM into the US was not worth it at all. And I just kind of staked my claim on the point that, like, it absolutely is. And this is hard to see, but left in my hand from an order from, I think, 4 or 5 years ago are 3 foil Debtor's Knells that at the time I pulled off MKM for 12 USD after shipping to my my partner in Europe and then sending over 1 large bundle, so customs on top of that. So $12.09 all said and told. At the time, they were sitting on TCG for 18, and right now they're down to about 14 for the foil. And that was based entirely off of just looking purely at arbitrage numbers and popular cards in the format and less demand overall. Just because a card was popular at the time, and it was at that moment in time when I looked and I hadn't done any historical research on it, didn't mean that it was going to churn immediately. Buy list opportunity for this wasn't too bad at the time. I think I can still get out at a profit, but this just speaks to like that naivety that I had at the beginning of this process for that arbitrage, as well as kind of moving in on foil as a whole, where I just needed to learn a method and kind of, you know, stick with it and just build a philosophy that works for me. One of the other things I do, and I think you do this as well, so we overlap here when it comes to timing, is standard rotation. So standard rotation up here is great for collection buys because everybody just liquidates. That's
yep.
And I am very picky with my collection buys up here. And at standard rotation, I buy things like foil Thoughtseize from Theros and foil Swan Songs, foil Deathrite Shamans, Abrupt Decays, these multi-format staples. And then I have a long hold on a full 40 Return to Rav foil shocks.
Yeah.
And the only reason I'm going to come out ahead on some of those is because I bought at rotation. So everything was dirt cheap. If I was buying this while it was all kind of in standard and I had not done like my regressions, then I would never have touched these, especially Deathrite Shaman, when that thing was like a $70+ foil.
Oh, yeah.
It was in standard and modern at the time. When I got in, it was just it was legacy only, so it was a really easy pick up and flip. But that is also when I will spec on standard. because I know I can get it cheap, and things have proven themselves.
Yeah, that's the thing that's really key there, is that's proven that itself, that there is the opportunity there. And that's one of the things that, when I say I got burned on standard, I meant buying standard foils to sell during standard.
Yes.
If you wait until after rotation, when everyone's dumping for drafts of the new set or whatever,
yeah.
Perfect, great, that's everything I need.
Yep.
I will give you 70% of your now mostly worthless cards, and we can go from there.
Exactly. There are people everywhere that love to play foil standard, and I'll buy whatever I feel like I can use personally, or that I think is worth the long-term hold because it was unique enough or good enough, or has a track record behind it, and I think it's going to be there, or I already see it. It's starting to come in modern and legacy, what have you. And so regarding timing, I think that part is kind of key for both of us.
Yeah.
Moving on, what do we look for in a foil spec? As I touched on in regards to that, I like a spec that is eminently playable. So that's why I picked up the Debtors now that I flashed. Those were eminently playable at the time. Since then, things have come around and kind of pushed it out of the format a bit. It's not as good as it used to be. Things have changed in EDH. The format's kind of gotten faster, so to speak. And Debtors now, as a 7 CMC enchantment, is quite slow. So I'll probably be sitting on those until the end of time, the ones I have left foil and non, and I'll get out of them at a break even because I was able to extract them at a time where they were just really cheap in arbitrage. But I like eminent utility. I don't like to have to guess. The only time I guess is when I'm buying a weird, like, full set of something. So at the end of Theros Black, as we're rotating out, people have gods to let go. So I'm not just going to sit there and pick Perforos and pick Nylea and poo-poo the rest. I'll buy all the gods because they're unique at that point. This is the first time we've seen them, and to me, having more is better than having less or none at all. There's arbitrage opportunity there. And sure enough, a lot of them did turn out to be bunk, or they've been reprinted enough where they're not worth as much as they should have been. But overall, even buying low at standard, despite the fact that it might be where they are finally recovering or even lower, it's fine because the ones that were worth, that had that pedigree, or you could see the immediate opportunity at the time outweighs the cents on the dollar that like Mogus and Afara were. That's what I like.
I think that's another area where we overlap is although I guess the way you define utility is different than how I define it. Mm-hmm. So I like utility, but the utility I look for is the imminent lack of reprintability.
Okay. Yep.
Or the imminent power of the card in CEDH. And that's one thing that I recognize and acknowledge I should care about regular EDH too, because those prices are important.
Yeah.
And this is something I'll touch on with my pick in this episode. I think CEDH foils that are on the low end are so much better in terms of opportunity because that metagame is so concentrated and so hive mind that if it shows up on one stream for labmen, spike feeders, whoever, all of a sudden everyone wants it and they want to try it, and the card just explodes. And that's the type of thing that I look for in terms of playability utility.
Yes.
Other than that, like I said, it's the imminent lack of reprintability is what I go for.
Yep. No, I like that. I understand that. And that's one of the reasons why I try and avoid things that don't really have standard appeal, at least not in the immediate future. When I picked up the shock lands, my bet on those was that they're just not going to go down. I'm going to pick them up around buy list price, and I should be able to get out at a break even no matter what. And it's also flashy if I want to throw down, super hard at modern or something. And that's fine. One of the things I dislike trying to look at is planeswalkers and whether or not a foil walker is really worth it. And you already touched on Chandra, Torch of Defiance. And for me, specking on foil planeswalkers is like, it feels like I'm always trying to jump on the grenade for somebody else, where it's like, all right, I'll pick this up because I have the ability to as a vendor, and I'm going to save somebody else the opportunity to just pick up this clunker and it's going to sit there in their binder because I can churn it, like, you know, immediately. But at the same time, it's like they're not all created equal. You know, do you want like a Johnny Goldmane in foil, or would you rather have the 3 CMC really aggressive one that people play? You know, would you rather have like Set Koth, or would you rather have Set Soren Markov? And a lot of that comes down to utility too. You know, there are obvious winners: Lily Vale, Lily Vess, Garuk Wildspeaker, JTMS,
Chase,
JVP. All these are like obvious calls and obvious holds. Even Chandra TOD, that card is ridiculous, and it's just the lack of adoption that kind of makes it illiquid. But that also is what makes it difficult for me to want to move in on foil walkers. That said, alt art or alternative like acquisition method foil walkers,
Mythic Edition, that stuff.
Well, no, not even that. Dual deck Venser.
Oh, yeah, fair.
Dual deck Koth. Like, those are great
Dual deck
because
Elspeth.
because there's only one way to get those highly played planeswalkers. So you don't have to spend as much on the set foil. You get alternate art and you get a foil at the same time. So there's like a little bit of give and take here when it comes to planeswalkers in my mind. And I'm not all in on the foil set planeswalker. I would rather churn that immediately than save it for the long run. But when it comes to like some of the other acquisition methods, it can be lucrative for me if the utility is there. I would rather sit on like infinite dual deck Vensers than a playset of foil Lily Vale. Like because the EDH market will eat up that Venser over time, and I have to find the one John to all format guy that doesn't already have 4 foil Lilianas in the version that he wants. You know?
And I think it's important too, the thing about those dual decks is it is an affordable version of a foil card with added liquidity. And that's another reason that those are ones that I'm actually comfortable picking up as well. Now, do I mind having like foil Jace Bellerin from some set in a binder? No, it's not the worst. No. Like, someone's gonna want it, and it's probably a guy that needs it for his Pillow Fort deck, and he's fine, you know, valuing it $1 or $2 up. Cool, fine. But it's not something, like you said, that I want to dedicate, like I did, 6 slots in a booth to a foil of because, I need it. No, I very much the same way. The stuff that I want to have is that alternative art type planeswalker. The one difference for me that's kind of analogous to planeswalkers is I will take all of the pack foil gods I can ever get.
Okay.
Ever. Those things, like out here, for whatever reason, sell like crazy. Planeswalkers, not so much.
That's awesome.
But especially after Return to Theros.
Yep.
Gods took off. Old ones, new ones. Doesn't matter if they were even a Theros set, like Corona, which foil, so whatever. Another reason for that. But stuff like that just took off, and it's been absurd to see. So I'm, obviously very happy for it. But gods are something that I will also always pick up whatever foils I can find of.
Yeah, I think that actually speaks to kind of like the last point I want to make before we touch on like supplemental stuff is gods, pack foil gods for me represent a price tag I'm not willing to throw money at because moving them here is difficult. And I like doing a lot of my work locally. If I've got to go to buy a list, that's fine. So essentially I'm just arbitraging for locals because I have the opportunity to do so. And I'm not afraid to do it. That's still a thing here. People are afraid to mail cards. But I don't want to be sitting on a lot of foil gods because of how I have to operate financially. And it's always to buy a list, never local. If I had more locals to work with or more locals that were interested, then I could start looking at like those medium ticket items, especially as they are like in standard. Buying new Heliod, which immediately had other format opportunities. I could have done something with that had I had the opportunity to do that in person. you know?
Yeah.
And I like that. It's different between us because that also continues to touch on like the regionality of a lot of this, and it comes, you know, our player base and who we work with and who we're trying to like help and serve essentially. All right, quick supplemental stuff. So we talked briefly Corona Starfoils, and we touched on that in the historic stuff. I think for both of us, when it comes to Starfoil, we'll pick it up at this point. It doesn't matter. Like Starfoils are proven, they're gonna hold. So from there, we kind of move forward, and we exist in a paradigm of you have set foils, you have pre-release promos that may or may not have alternate art, and then Cons of Tarkir hit, and I discussed already getting burned on the pre-release promos with the date stamp. All right, so eventually we move into a timeline where we have set foils, we have pre-release promos, which is same art but stamp. We have full art. You know, we're not eventually alt art, and then and not even just
showcase.
Yes, exactly, the showcase stuff or alternative border. And now we have etched in Commander Legends, and we'll have again old border foils in Time Spiral too.
Remember when they lost the technology to do that, according to Marrow?
Yeah, I know, that's funny.
I do.
And so when it comes to alt art stuff, these like supplemental methods of acquiring foils, mainly being showcased through collector's boosters because that's the easiest way to do it. Where do you stand on stuff like that?
So I'm very much of the those qualify to me as masterpieces when it comes to showcase specifically.
Okay.
I stay away from masters. Those things are hot garbage unless it's new art. If it's new art, it's a completely different story. When Manamorphose tanked from masters, I bought as many as I could find.
Okay.
Same with Empty the Warrens. Same with Goblin Charbelcher. Yes, I got burned on Goblin Charbelcher. I'm still getting burned, but Manamorphose came up and Empty did all right too.
Yep.
Other than that, I try to stay away from them because I think we're at the oversaturation point. Showcase though, I'll pick up those foils whenever I can, similar to the alt art walkers from War of the Spark.
Yep.
If they're there, I'm snagging them.
Yep. I like the idea of some of the alt border stuff in showcases as kind of the premiere version. What tickles my fancy a little more is the etched, and not just because of the look, but because they started out well underpriced and kind of underserved in the market, like across the board. There were some obvious standouts to like the ones that had a real price, but the majority of them were underpriced, underserved. I like that. Showcase similarly, for a while things do stagnate, and there's some I like because of that, and some I don't because they already have a real price tag. I don't think they're going to get reprinted, like you said, unless they're super generic, like Fabled Passage, which got hoisted real quick. Like, I would have a concern about the Triomes. I do not have a concern about Uro and Kroxa. Embercleave. I don't like. That's where I am. So
that's fair.
Me, so I agree. You gotta kind of treat it like the masterpieces and say, okay, this isn't going to get reprinted like this for a while. Yeah. But at the same time, I need to operate on some very specific avenues to ensure that if it does, I don't get,
hoisted.
Yep. And Masters foils, man, those are difficult. Some of them will look cool. The foil Karn Lib looked really neat from Modern Masters 2. It had this interesting like shadowing to it, so that made it kind of this approachable foil from that standpoint. But it's hard to want to get behind those sets with the way the foils just warp intrinsically. Yep. And I think that's kind of a danger overall to a lot of this, is you have to be careful with what you're picking up and how you're going to store it, especially in the long term. To the best of my knowledge, even the etched curl, but if they don't curl as much, you can just sleeve them and you're okay. And Chilcott linked an article on Twitter last week that basically expands the the silica bead method of how to like uncurl your foils. You basically just create your own little humidor to help with this. And that's also something that I keep in the back of my mind as I start looking at this stuff. Am I worried about my showcase tour mods? Not really, because they're in a 1K that's stuffed full. If they warp, man, good luck. You know, I get crushed on that until I take care of it. But other than that and the reprintability, I'm in on supplementals that aren't just dog to begin with, where it's almost like helpless.
Yeah.
From the vaults are almost helpless. I think, is it like Modern Masters 1 or 2? I think the one with the cardboard package, those are helpless. Like,
yeah.
I want to dodge all that stuff. But I'm all in on low price and high utility supplemental cards. I'll be paying a lot of attention to Triumphs shortly. They're all on the rise, but unless we get some in the near future, I think it's going to be a good point in time to say, okay, here's the inflection, and now's the time to move in on showcase foils.
I agree with that. I think especially some of the showcase foils, it seems like a lot of the EDH stuff especially is deflated along with set foils, despite the fact that it seems like that stuff has sped up.
Yep.
And specifically the cards that have showcase foils as well. And you noticed it probably more than any other set with Ikoria, because you had like 4 different showcase versions of some of those cards with the Godzilla frames and everything else.
And the comic book stuff, yeah.
Yeah, so that's one that's really interesting to me that I like pay special attention to, is the stuff that I look at and I'm like, all right, this is like a blue-red Spells Matter card. So what if it's banned by the rules committee? Sheldon's head is so far up his ass, he's probably digesting his own tongue at this point. Yeah. People will play with it regardless.
Yeah.
And
everybody wants an otter.
Yeah, otters are great. And then legendary squirrel. Well, squirrels are a meme, so get it. It's a legendary squirrel. Yeah. Oh, Thanks, legendary squirrel, for making Earthcraft $1 million.
Oh my god! Among other things, Nut Collector. I'm waiting for Chatter, the flashback spell. Like once that goes, you know you're living the meme dream.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Is it Acorn Harvest?
Yeah.
No, Chatter's the flashback spell. Acorn Harvest is the one that goes in the land.
Yeah.
Earthcraft, Acorn Harvest, Infinite Squirrels. Yeah. Foils are a weird beard, and it's like you got to craft your own formula, and that's kind of why we wanted to tie a bow around this, because there's a lot to think about in regards to the historics of a foil, in regards to the generations of foil and what's available out there. And then there's always lessons to be learned. You know, what we've tried, succeeded, failed with, you know, that these are lessons for us based on our circumstances. And it's all information to digest and move forward with. You know, what we do isn't going to work for everybody else, but there's always the opportunity to just pick the methods that you like and kind of move forward overall. Do I think foil speccing is lucrative? I absolutely do. Do I agree with our first podcast guest, no, it was like the third podcast guest, Jeremy Muir, when he said he hates foils because of what it does to the game financially and how hard it makes the vendor job? Absolutely. I absolutely agree with that.
Wizards is making that as hard as humanly possible.
Yep, but at the end of the day, they are a dwindling resource, so to speak. They are less common than their non-foil counterparts, obviously. And if you're looking to kind of carve out a niche financially and look to sit on some things aside from reserve list or reserve list foils, star foils, like not the cornerstones, but like the first iteration of everything is what that represents, then, you know, set all that stuff aside, then you want to start looking at like playables, variants, things like that. Like,
yeah.
But
the normal stuff that's more science than art.
Yes, you know, absolutely. And always remember, there is a bulk foil price.
Yes.
And you should probably be familiar with that if you're going to be picking up foils from collections. Not everything is worth a dime or a quarter. There's definitely a floor. It's like 7 cents or something.
Yeah. Ish.
Pick?
Yes.
All right. You go.
So,
yep.
Like I touched on it, I'm just seizing it right now.
Yes.
We're going. That I would be touching on this later when I said my pick. My pick this week is touching on a running theme for my last few picks. Aether Barrier Foil from Nemesis. Now, before I get into this has the most adorable face, maybe, of any art in all of Magic. I just want to put him in my pocket. That has nothing to do with why I picked this card, though. So, the reason I picked this card is, one, it has imminent CEDH playability in a stacked shell. Everybody loves stacks. Stacks is great. Don't think it's not. Second, there's a historical basis for this.
Yep.
So we're seeing a little bit of a surge in reserve list foils and foils, star foils in general. So if you pull up the MTG stocks graph, you can see that this card spiked in 2018, 2017, somewhere in there, which was about when we had a CEDH boom. So at that point, suddenly, we skyrocket. Foil comes up to like $15, $20, $30. Now, when you look at the stocks graph, and this is since, well, I picked this immediately after we recorded our last episode, which Reptar can verify.
Yes.
We were back to sub $10, and there were actually foils listed for around $5. I know because I bought them. I feel like based on this and what we're seeing with other star foils, there's a reason to believe that this will spike again, and we will see the floor settle at a higher number than before. Before, we were looking at about $2 to $3 a piece, and then the floor settled at around 10-ish. Well, I think we're going to see that again, and it may settle around 15 to 20, but I think that it's the type of thing that, yet again, stock or bond, you're not going to lose money on this. I think your turnaround might be a little bit quicker on this one. Because of the way it's worked in the past, where you see a couple months maybe of this plateau pricing before we settle back down into a new floor, you're looking at probably a 1 to 2, maybe 3 month timeline for when you can out this profitably to a buy list. Now, can you immediately turn it around and throw it up on like Sick Deals or some other group for a profit? Probably. There's going to be someone that wasn't aware the card existed and wants to get in on it before it goes up more. It's probably not going up more, but that guy's out there, and he wants your cards. So, that you may be able to get a little bit quicker on, but I think that generally you are looking at that like 2 to 3 month timeline for this, unless you want to hold for the next spike, which unfortunately, based on what we've seen, may be 3 to 4 years.
Yep. The idea of picking up stuff like this, a foil that it hasn't been targeted yet, trying to get ahead, I like the idea of, and I wasn't like wholeheartedly, and this wasn't in regard to the conversation that we had last week or even the pick, I wasn't wholeheartedly in the boat that like the reserve list spike is going to float. And then I was looking back at some trend tracking I've been doing, and the amount of cards that have popped over the reserve list basically point to the fact that the entire reserve list is rising. Frankenstein's Monster finally went. You know, Anvil of Bogarden is a several $100 card right now. And we're still waiting for some low-hanging fruit, some very like chaff pieces to go, but the overall floor on the entirety of the reserve list is rising. And then to kind of corroborate that, at end of day today, Ben Blywis posted a screenshot of a Google sheet that he created for Star City Games attached to a specific page that he had created on Star City page just to buy dual lands at higher than anybody else by end of day. He basically, before the bell rang, so to speak, threw out their buy list and is going fishing. And people were discussing in the comments about the price of these cards and if this is going to be just for today. And Ben said, no, this is the new normal.
Yeah.
And now I'm more inclined to agree based on what I saw last night from the trend tracking. And Ben Blywis, who's like been running around with his hair on fire on Twitter for the last couple of weeks trying to reprice all this stuff, finally came out and said that he has enough data to call this as being like the new normal. Makes me believe in this a bit more, and moving in on unique cards like this a bit more than I wanted to before. So I think the float is there, and the float is real. Timeline, I'm unsure of because of that very hardy spike that we just saw. But if it holds for a couple of weeks, then I believe you're absolutely right with the timeline, and I think it will.
Yeah, I think one thing worth noting about the new buy list prices that have been floated by SCG. So this near mint buy price is great. However, it is still inferior to the Chinese buy lists.
Yes.
But this is something that we're seeing when you talk about arbitrage, and we can touch on this in a future episode again. When vendors start flooding overseas to ship cards, places like Star City have to respond. Anyways, that's an aside.
Yep, no, absolutely. You're absolutely correct, because Star City can't keep their store stocked and can't support their client base if everything's flooding into the European or Asian market, depending, which way the cards are flowing, as we touched on. So, yeah. The other thing is that I mentioned in our Discord is that by doing it at the bell, nobody has a chance to respond. So Star City basically gets like 16 to 18 hours of like unfettered access to this market until tomorrow morning, when Card Kingdom can come in and raise their cash price. And it's all a bit hand wavy. Star City is the best buy prices, but some of the worst retail. It's similar to channels. Like if you're going to get 30% credit, cool, but your retail price is so much higher that it just doesn't work out numerically. But neither here nor there. My pick for the week, not too far off in price, not too far off in Magic Timeline, is Exodus Coat of Arms.
Ah, yes, a classic.
Yes. Best, I like the art in this frame. It looks terrible in the new frame, but still the best flavor text. It's just Goblin flavor text is always the best flavor text.
Yeah.
So this has been a card I've been watching for a while, and you can see on the stocks graph, it plateaus forever, it pops a little bit, plateaus, and now we're coming back up, and a lot of this recent growth is prior to like call time announcements, so we didn't know how tribal, in essence, this set was going to be. And that is exactly what Coat of Arms plays into. It is the mono tribe card. That's it. So when we get Maskwood Nexus, an artifact that fits into every tribe, Coat of Arms becomes a lot more interesting and a lot more sought after. So generally, finding itself in tribal decks that look to turn the creature sideways, Coat of Arms represents essentially a static kill condition. The only tribe that doesn't need this is Slivers, and I'll touch on that in a moment. So, unlike Crater of Behemoth and similar cards that we've touched on, Coat of Arm requires nothing more than resolution to provide a continued threatening board presence. So, Crater of Behemoth, Thunderhoof, Baloth, Ibex, things like that, generally require you to either cast them and then it's a one-off, or assume they live into combat. Coat of Arms, straight threatening. So, as of right now, when you look on Rec, and I'll bring this up, it serves smaller tribes in terms of average creatures. In terms of average creature size, you notice you're not seeing dragons on here, and you'll see goblins, humans, zombies on here. It's interesting that Sliver Legion is on here as a general that this is paired with, because generally speaking, this is a budget option to Sliver Legion. But as I mentioned, Demon's not here, Dragon's not here, Angel's not here, because those creatures are generally so large, they don't need the extra help. Okay, so as we get support for these underserved tribes, including things like squirrels, saplings, and wizards, which are also popping, we'll see continued growth in cards like Coat, because they're reliable and comparatively cheap finishers.
Yeah.
Also, being color agnostic, pretty dope. Referring back to the timeline, it's just been a perennially slow gainer, but this card is now turbocharged because of Maskwood Nexus. My expectation is that this begins to burn pretty brightly shortly after the call time releases in the rear view window, so maybe in about a month or two. While the Exodus art has been repurposed for multiple print runs, it remains the only version with the original artifact border and the only one in black border. 7th edition art is unique to 7th edition, but is white border. So that's a little standoffish for a lot of people. And 7th edition is also a little more expensive right now than Exodus. And I don't know if the print runs at the end of the day are the same for those two sets. We kind of lose numbers early to that. But,
yeah.
So that's kind of whatever. So my expectation is you'll be able to out this to buy list a profit in about 6 months, especially with support from Strixhaven, the D&D set, and Innistrad Jacob V. Edward. It's all tribal from here out, essentially. And you might look at Strixhaven and say, okay, well, what are we getting there? That's going to be a wizard set, most likely, so that serves that tribe. You can actually kill somebody with wizards finally instead of like milling them out or just pissing them off by countering everything. D&D is going to bring you the additional like rogues that we're kind of missing right now from rogue strategies, which show up if you don't look at Rec. If you look at MTG decks on Arena, Moto, people are playing rogue EDH for some reason with Coat of Arms. So you get, rogues and wizards and warriors. Everything's going to be there. You're going to get humans among those. And then I mentioned Innistrad. We know that set's going to be split between 2 tribes already, and neither of these tribes have great ways to end the game outside of like their own power without this card. You can sit there and peck away at people all you want with vampires, but they're not that great at going wide, though they do go pretty tall thanks to Markov. Coat of Arms allows a different kind of gameplay, and depending on what we get in the set, it might slide into there. Werewolves is just a super underserved tribe next to squirrels and saprolings. So this is kind of, if they get a boost in that part of the Innistrad set, then we can see this slide in there. And this is just, everybody's looking at Maskwood Nexus, and this is in the shadows. So if you want to make your money, this is where you look. Like, everybody knows about Maskwood Nexus. That's obvious.
Yeah.
Coat of Arms, kind of holding strong in the background right now.
I think this is also another one of those stock and bond situations where this card's not going anywhere. When it gets reprinted, it doesn't just tank the value out of nowhere. It's still the old border OG Coat of Arms, and there's always an amount of like financial utility to that fact, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that, even if you're not going like 30 deep, just having 5 or 6 of these along like in your assembly of binders or case or whatever is never bad. Someone's always going to want this card wherever you go, and I think that's just always a positive. So, I like it.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a casual card through and through, and this is one of those cards we talked on before. You put it in a case, and somebody's going to walk by and go, "Oh yeah, that's the name of that card that I needed for my random, Homerid deck,
Lizard Tribal, or whatever."
Exactly. It's that kind of card. And it has the price tag, to move along. The nice thing is that the delta is shrinking between buy list and market, and the Exodus copy remains one of the most sought after by Card Kingdom, short of the mystery booster version.
Yep.
No, they're looking for 25 Exodus and then 55 mystery booster versions. So there's demand for this card. Population shrinking across TCG Player and Card Kingdom buy list is also, the amount they're paying now and the number they're looking for also increased from when I picked it to now. So it's not like you're ever going to swing and miss on this card. And I really doubt it's coming back into Standard. They've done it a couple times and it just never works out. Always in a core set and it just farts out. Like, nobody cares. Yeah. This card costs $5. It's ridiculous in Standard. Like, expectations that people play this card in Standard is silly. And then it just takes a slot and people get mad about it when they open it in Limited. You're like, all right, cool. A dead rare. I can do nothing with this. Like,
it's one of those hidden gems financially that you're never really happy about unless you're a vendor. Then you're always happy about it.
Yes, exactly. Well, I think that's going to be it for this week. We'll probably continue to field questions about foil specking because this is a very deep topic, and as I mentioned, everybody has their own methods, and building a successful model can take time and can take patience. So if you have any questions in regards to, specking on foils, or you just want to talk a little more about some of the stuff that we've picked up, why we picked up certain cards, or a little more in-depth conversation about our methods, feel free to hit us up. You can tweet at us at MtG Cabalcast on Twitter. You can hit up each of us on Twitter. I'm at Haltime Reptar. You're
Thirsty Sizzler.
And then, you can find us. The cast is on Patreon and Facebook, Spotify, Stitcher, Audible, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast. I think that's it.
I think that's it too.
Yeah.
Pretty sure.
Even if we move to like Last FM, I don't think we get broadcast. I don't think we go to SoundCloud on Last FM. So I think we're good. I think we got them all.
If only.
Yeah. But that is going to be it for this week. And I'm sure we'll talk about foils at some point in time in the next year or two.
Yeah, definitely.
We will see you guys next week.